Hey guys, what's up? We're going to be starting in like 2-3 minutes. I'm going to let people roll in for a sec. Okay, guys, hey. So, guys, my name is Ashutosh Kaushik, and welcome to Get Started with React. In this webinar, we're going to be going over the core concepts of React and how to implement them. And I hope I can help you get started with React. So, okay. Now, you can use whatever I'm going to teach today in this webinar to build web, mobile, and even desktop applications because React is kind of versatile. So now, of course, some things are going to be different in all the platforms, but the main concepts of React stay the same. And however, for the ease of understanding, we're going to be discussing the web way of React. Basically, we're going to be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make our UI components. And now, what we're going to build in the eventually by the end of this webinar is a to-do list app. Now, the CSS of the app and the styling of the app won't be that great, but I'm definitely going to go with the proper functionality and help you guys with everything. Now, before we start, I want to talk a little bit about JavaScript and why a lot of people hate it and why I love it and a lot of people love it actually. Because now JavaScript is the crux of the web right now, okay? And it is one of the most important things in the world, and the whole web is based on it at this point. But it is also a really poorly written, not really poorly, but like it's a poorly written language. And there's a few reasons to that, which I'm not going to get into, but all you need to know at this point is you can build amazing stuff with it. And one of those to help us build amazing stuff, there's this thing called React. So before anything, let's jump into the prerequisites, the things you need to know to start basically. And this okay. You need to have a basic knowledge of HTML, CSS, and the document object model, also known as the DOM. You need to know a little bit of JavaScript and a little bit about object-oriented programming. And a basic knowledge of Node.js and NPM will help. But even if you don't know these things, it's okay. And these concepts, even if you don't fully understand these concepts, it's not going to be hard for you to understand the working of a React app. So you can still try to code along and maybe even like try to understand. And you'll be able to grasp the important stuff. And once you actually decide to get deep into React, I'm pretty sure this webinar is something that will help you. Now, why do you even want to learn React, right? Okay, now what is React, okay? React is a JavaScript library, and it's not a framework. It's created by Facebook, by the way. Yeah, okay. So why do I say it's not a framework and it's a library? And you need to know the major difference between a library and a framework is that a library gives you freedom to do what you want, and basically it gives you tools to go your own way, and a framework shows you the way. So they're a bit different in some ways. I'm not saying the framework is a bad thing or a library is a bad thing. Both work in their own ways, and you have to decide what you want to use when you're building something. It reacts around the concept of the virtual DOM. Now the virtual DOM isn't something React created itself. It has been there for quite a while now. And the use of virtual DOM is something that makes React what it is, and it helps it be the really fast and amazing thing it is. Okay, so and it also makes creating single page web apps a lot easier. Yeah, Node.js basically like the basic, not the backend Node.js, Hisham, and yeah, yes, npm packages is what I'm talking about. Basically, we're going to be discussing one of these npm packages. Yeah, Node.js to basically use node packages exactly. And okay, so let's jump into why we should be even using React. Like why React? Why not Angular or Vue, which are the other great frameworks that you could be using? And there's a bunch of frameworks and libraries. Like one of the most famous ones are Angular, Vue, and Svelte, and all of them are pretty great in their own way. I like React because of a few things. one of those things. It's used by one of the most major companies now. Facebook created React, so you can pretty much guess that WhatsApp uses it, the desktop version of WhatsApp. Instagram uses it as a React Native. Facebook uses it to make, like, they made their own website using React. And Reddit, Pinterest, Dropbox, Netflix, and a whole lot of other websites like Airbnb and stuff, etc. use React because, as I said before, it makes creating single-page web apps really easy. So if you wanna be working on a website, which is just like the whole point of that website is to look pretty, maybe React is not the thing to use. But if you want to create functional apps which have to perform properly and which have to do a lot of things, basically, you're gonna have to use a framework or a library. And okay, so now why do these companies basically use React? So that's basically what I just explained to you. Okay. Okay, let's just see what we're going to be discussing today. And okay, we're going to be discussing the prerequisites needed by the React app to work, basically. Which one of these are like they are Babel and JSX and stuff. I'm going to get deeper into that eventually. Then we're going to be discussing the virtual DOM, which is coming up next actually. Then we're going to be discussing the actual things in React, which are class-based components, states, props, lifecycle methods, and more. Now there's a different kind of components which came last year, I suppose, which are called hooks basically, and you could and functional components. Functional components have been there for a long time, but there's a difference between class-based and functional components is that functional components don't create instances like class-based component does. Instances basically means objects, which you may know if you know a little bit about object-oriented programming. And let me check the chat for a second. Okay, interesting sound. Okay, I'm gonna try to be louder. I have my volume at full at this point. And okay, so these are the main things basically. And okay, now let's talk about the virtual DOM. So the virtual DOM is something that makes React possible, you could say. Now, to explain this, I have something for you that you could really help from. Now, okay, React creates a tree of custom objects representing a part of the DOM. Now, I don't think you can understand that by just the proper definition. And what does it mean basically? Well, in essence, React is a layer between the real DOM and, okay, it's a typo, sorry. Real DOM and the updates basically that come to the DOM. So I'll show you one small diagram basically. Yeah, okay, this is it. There's a little diagram that I made before the stream started, and see, ignore this bit, okay? The one I'm highlighting right now. And the other two bits above, DOM and update. So basically what happens in a normal web app is that once you pass an update, like you want to tell using JavaScript for the DOM to update, what happens is it just directly updates the DOM. Now what the virtual DOM does is basically it tracks every instant of the DOM, okay? And once an update happens, this little thing right here doesn't exist anymore. So what happens? You pass an update, it goes to the virtual DOM, it checks what has updated, and there's a thing called should component update, and that basically checks if anything has changed from the previous state of the DOM to the next state of the DOM. So if something has actually changed, it'll update the DOM basically, and if it hasn't, it won't update the DOM. And that's where the state variables in React come in play, which I told you about in a bit ago. Wait a second. Yeah. And the state variable basically, this right here. And so what happens basically is something that we're going to be discovering in a while when we jump into our code editor. And we're going to be discussing these things basically. So there's components, props, states, and life cycles, and condition rendering, and even events actually. So okay, I'll read out the definitions for you guys. Basically, the components let you split the UI into independent reusable pieces and think about each piece in isolation. So basically, it's like modularizing your code. You could, if you wanted to, do everything in a single component, but that would really mess with your code, and that's not something you should be doing. It's like in any other programming language, separating the functions you want to be using. And then this props, basically there's a properties which you can pass from the parent component to the child component. It's something like that, and you can pass anything in these as properties. It could be variables, it could be objects, it could be functions. And then there's the state. So the state is an instance of React component class. Component class being defined as an object to set the observable properties that control the behavior of the component. So as soon as the state updates, it will re-render the whole component. Now, there's life cycles. So basically, there's three main life cycles: mounting, updating, and unmounting. Mounting basically means the component is gonna appear on the DOM, and updating means anything inside that component is gonna be updating. And then there's unmounting, that the component is gonna be removed from the screen. So we can meddle with the stuff while this is happening. And there's and then there's condition rendering, which is something we use states and props and stuff to do eventually. Okay, I'll get into that once we jump into the code editor. Okay, so let's just, before any further ado, jump into the code editor. So, if you have a code editor like VS Code, and I'd recommend that you have VS Code because it has a lot of cool things. So if you click Control plus the little wavy key beside the number one key, you can get your terminal. And in that, I want you to write cd into any of your folder where you work. In that, I want you to write npx. Basically, npx means it's a shortcut for a command line interface for npm, you could say. So it's like create React app. So now what is create React app? So if you look at the reactjs.org documentation website, you can see that React can be used in any way. You can just simply implement React into your basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript file, and like by a CDN link, or you could use the whole bootstrap that React has created called create React app, and that's what we're going to be using because that's a whole lot better than using CDNs. And we're going to be naming it to-do list webinar. Let's just say that, and it's going to start working, and it's going to take a bit to create the whole app, and it's going to give us the basic structure of the app which we're going to be using to work. Yes, Nirmit, npm and npx should be installed. Npx should need not be installed first, but npm npx is something you get from npm basically. So if you install node, npm will automatically work. Okay, and it's done, as you can see. I'm gonna zoom in a bit so you can see clearly. So it did a whole lot of stuff to basically create the whole app, and once it's done, you can cd into that folder you created. And once you've done that, where I'll use it, I'll open it right now, right here. And let's open. I'll open the terminal again. And now we're in to-do list webinar. Basically what we created, it will create its own folder and it will give you a lot of things. And let's just discuss what these things are. It will give you a file called package.json, and you'll see a bunch of, it's a JSON object, this whole thing. JSON means JavaScript object notification. It is nothing more than, well, like it's kind of an array, but it's not really an array. It's an object, okay. So, and you'll see a variable called dependencies, and this is what you want to worry about in this whole thing. Other thing is created by React. This is where you can even add your own stuff eventually, but don't meddle with it automatically. You have to meddle with it using the command line. Now, you have React DOM, React scripts, and React right here. These are the things that React needs to work by the start, basically. And you can add your own things here, which you're going to be using. I'm going to be using one thing. So I'm going to install it. And this is how you install your stuff using npm, by the way. So you simply do npm. I'm going to be using yarn actually. Yarn is another package manager, nothing different from npm. Is create React app the only method to use? Yeah, okay. Shivanka Shankar asks, is create React app the only method to make a React application? No, we can use CDNs, as Akshat below you is saying. And we can just simply add it to your HTML and JavaScript website. But I prefer using create React app because it gives me a little bit more freedom, I think, of setting my own routes and stuff. If you start making bigger apps and stuff like that, and you'll realize why create React app is a whole lot better option. I'll simply, okay, by the way, let's get back to it. I'll simply do yarn add UUID. Okay, this is something we're going to be using eventually. I'm just going to do that for now because it's something really important for a to-do list app. What this does is basically whenever you call this function UUID, it'll give us a function, and I'll show you how to use that eventually. Don't worry about it if you don't understand something right now. Once we jump into the code editor, it's all going to be very clear. Okay, so we're going to be using UUID to generate a random ID, which is going to be different than any other IDs that we're going to be using. Now, there's another file you'll see which is called yarn lock. If you're using npm, you do not have yarn, don't worry. This will be called package.lock.json. It basically logs the versions of the things you're using. So things don't go out of hand, because the developers that created all this stuff basically keep updating it with new features and bug updates and stuff like that. So we need to stick to one specific version so it doesn't mess with our code. Then there's when you go to the src folder, and you open the public folder. What you see here is that there's only one index.html file, okay, and you see there's legit only one div where all of the thing we do that happens, and it has an ID called root. I want you to remember this ID root, and I'll show you where we're using it eventually, okay? So basically, all we do is going to be happening is a single HTML file. That's why you may call it a single page web application, I guess, okay? And then we'll go to, and all of this such stuff beside is gibberish that is given to us by React. You don't want to worry about it right now. And there's the app.css. Okay, no, wait. There's an app.js file, and this is a functional component that React has made for us by the start, basically. And we don't have to worry about this, but I'll show you what it looks like. If you want to test your basically you want to test your React code, there's one thing, really cool thing you can do is npm start. Okay, you're going to write npm start, or if you're using yarn, you're going to write yarn start, and it's going to open a development server right beside you, and it's going to be hosted on localhost. So what happens is, as soon as you save something here, suppose I write this and save, and it's going to save it, it's going to update it on that development server, so you can basically see what's happening very quickly. And by the way, about that root ID I told you, so this is root ID in this index.html, right? So this function called react.render, basically this render function will find this root ID in your HTML file, and it'll put anything that's inside this little snippet right here inside that root component, root div, basically. Okay, sorry. Then there's the app.js. Wait, let me check the comments for a sec. Okay, nothing. By the way, guys, if you have any questions at any point, you can feel free to ask. There's no restrictions, and you can even contact me after this this thing is over. It's absolutely fine too. There's app.js. Okay, in app.js. Okay, never mind that. Okay, let's just start the development server, and I'll open the Chrome. Okay, let's just yarn start. Okay, and it's going to start a development server. There's already something running. Okay, yeah, sure. Now it opened. Okay, you can't see that. Wait, I'm gonna be doing something so you can see the reloaded version. And okay, so I hope you can see what's on the side. So basically, this is what React gives us from the scratch. This is something they made. We don't have to worry about it. And I can show you the hot reload thing I was talking to you about. Okay, then okay. So it says save to reload, right? I'll just add a bracket and say, hey, welcome. And as soon as I save it, it's going to update it, and I'll see, hey, welcome. So this makes the development really easy. So now we're going to go ahead and basically delete everything. And if I save it, it'll show us an error that nothing is there, basically because we're not exporting the app.js file. Now, I'm going to start by writing the basic thing that we need in every single React file, that is import React from React. Basically, we need to use React to be working with React. And then I'm going to be simply starting we're going to be importing the CSS file that is there because we're going to be using that. This is the CSS file that was used to create that little blue thing you saw before. We're going to be deleting this too. And we're going to be importing /app.css. Okay. And then we're going to be defining a class-based component. So class-based component basically simply uses a class. Class app extend React.component. Inside this, we're going to call the render function, and which will return a value of simple div. Okay, we need to export the app component bit too. And as you can see, it shows hello world right here. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see it a whole lot better. And this is what it is. So it's still hot reloading, everything still works. It's good. So let's jump into the things that we're going to be discussing. I think this is enough for the setup. Inside this, let's give this a class of parent. Okay. And then let's define let's just make an add button. And then let's make a div which contains the children basically. It's going to have div with class name, tasks. So by the way, I was discussing about JSX, and this is what JSX is, by the way. This HTML looking thing right here. And what you can see here is that in HTML, the thing we use is class and not class name. And that's one of the differences between JSX and HTML. Actually, JSX and HTML are really different in a lot of other terms. Basically, in JSX, you can use JavaScript inside JSX by using these curly brackets. And this is the whole other thing. It's not HTML at this point. So that's what we're going to be doing. There's also one other thing that I was talking about at the start is Babel. And you can see when I go to yarn log, there's this thing called add Babel code frame. There's a whole lot of things basically, and we don't need to worry about this. All we need to know is that Babel basically what it does is makes this whole code right here. Okay, wait. Yeah. Make this whole code basically readable by the browsers. So the browsers don't understand this, right? Browser won't understand all these React stuff basically. So there's something which has to make it understandable by the browsers. And also Babel also does this one very cool thing. It makes the code backward compatible. So all the browsers don't really work on the latest version of JavaScript. As you may know, maybe the JavaScript has a lot of version and it keeps updating regularly. And so basically, Babel does something that makes JavaScript available, like this function available in all sorts of browsers. And in this task, basically, okay, so let's get back to it. I'm going to add an h2, and I'm going to give it a task 1, and I'm going to give it another div. No, I'm just going to give it a p actually. Actually, we don't even need that. Okay, so that's actually it. This is one of our tasks, basically. Okay, I mean, we're going to be working with these. I'm going to copy and paste it 4 times maybe. If I save it, you can see there's a button here which we can press. It doesn't look good, yeah, I know, but like we want to worry about the functionality right now. And then we'll go to app.css because we want to make it at least look readable because it's really stuck to the left for some reason. And we're going to take parent. CSS by the way works exactly like it does in HTML. There's nothing, not much different. And we can give it a margin left of 50 pixels, I guess. And it'll come over here. And okay, I can close this actually. Let me check the comments. Angular or React? If you had to choose something, I think I'd say React. And at this point, if I had a choice, if I wanted to learn something, Angular or React, I would definitely learn React. Because I've looked at over the documentation of Angular and I don't find it that captivating. You could say React has some things that are like really useful if you are working with basically what do you say big apps. Really ingenious, by the way. Thanks for asking that. Okay. Then we get back to okay. Where were we? Yeah. Let's just style this button a little bit. By the way, there's one small tip I would like to give you if you're working with web development in any way is that don't take CSS lightly. Because if you try to take CSS lightly, it's gonna really mess you over because I can't even tell you the amount of times I've had to look up online how to center something, and it can get really frustrating because people really tend to underestimate CSS, and you really shouldn't be doing that, I think. I give a little that and width of 100 pixels, height 50 pixels, I think. That's too much actually. Let's let it be. And background color of, let's just take something cool. I don't know. That looks really bad, but anyway. Okay, that's a little button. I'll add one more thing. Now we can click and act like a button. Okay, never mind that. So we have a button ready and we have the task list ready. So I'm just going to be making it look really bad, but don't mind that because we're just going to be working with the functionality. So let's start with discussing state, okay? Now, how you basically define a state variable is like this. State is equal to, and you can simply define a JSON object. And that will be like, let's say, text name. No, I like docs, okay? And what you can do is, because I said JSX is basically JavaScript, you can simply write this .state .text. And as I save it, it will simply say I like dogs. Okay, so this is nothing different than a normal variable. Okay, and we're going to get into that later, but before that I have to discuss with you something that is really important. Is what do you mean by this? What do you mean by this dot state? Why am I using this? Why don't I just like write state text way? Or why don't I just write state dot text? How does that not work? Why does that not work? So what happens is, as I told you before, Babel will transpile this little thing right here into something else. I'm going to try to make it look a little bigger, I think. I'm going to make this at least more because we don't need this right now. Okay. So the Babel will transpile this into something else, and what it transpiles it into is a constructor. And if you know a little bit about constructors, you know that they're fired at like whenever this class is basically called, you could say. Okay. And you can define this dot state is equal to text I love cats, and it'll still work. It still works the same way because Babel basically transpile state is equal to text and whatever I wrote here before into this. So what does this little thing right here do? So what this does is basically, so the class app here creates an instance throughout the class, and that instance basically refers to itself. Okay, it refers to class itself. And super right here, the super function, makes this available throughout the whole program. That's why you need super for. Otherwise, you won't be able to access anything. Even if I don't add it right here, Babel will add it by itself. So there's no way to actually remove it, I think, at this point. So let's just not use this because it's kind of deprecated now, and so we can simply use state is equal to I love ferrets. Now let's do dogs. Okay. Okay. So let's see how the state variable works. Now let's add an event listener to this button right here. Event listeners work a little bit in a different way. Now, if you had to add an event listener in a normal HTML file, it would be something like that: document dot query selector, and then you pass the ID of the function here, right? That's how it worked before. And then you add an event listener, like add event listener, and all that stuff you had to do before. But in React, you can just simply call onClick. That's how simple it is. This dot handle click, and handle click is a function that we haven't defined yet. We can define it right now. And you might see I'm using arrow functions. If you're not familiar with arrow functions in React, I guess I should explain, but before, let's check out the chat for a second. Okay. How is React different from Angular? Tushar Madhwani. React is different from Angular in the sense that Angular does not use, it's a whole different thing basically. So React is a library and Angular is a framework. React gives you stuff you can work with, and Angular is going to show you the way how to do things. And it has a whole other different functions, you could say. And Angular is a good choice. You can use it definitely, but I prefer React. That's all. Wasn't Angular made by Google? Yes, it was made by Google. Himanshu. Akshat asks, can I use materialized CSS or Bootstrap along with React, or does React have predefined components too? Yes, you can definitely use materialize or Bootstrap along with React. In fact, Bootstrap actually has its own Bootstrap React thing, and you can, just like I included, I think I can still see it. I don't know. Okay, I can't. But you can still import easily Bootstrap from React, and there's a whole lot of other amazing packages to get predefined React components. I can show you some right here on the browser. I think you can see the browser. Wait. Yeah, you can see the browser. Okay. In the browser, I can show you that there's a lot of things like, well, let's see. I can show you right here. If you go to Bootstrap React, there's a thing called React Bootstrap.github.io basically, and in this you can see there's a thing called this thing called components, and it shows you exactly what you need to do to implement these components. Like recently, I used this carousel, which was pretty cool, and it'll give you the whole code, and just have to copy and paste it. But before even doing that, you need to install this, just like I installed that UID thing before. npm install React Bootstrap and Bootstrap basically, and then you can import it like this right here. And all of these little packages that are made for React, you can find them on npm. npm has this whole library of React packages which are really good, and if you are going to be using something, you should definitely look over. So let's define this handler click function right here. So you can see I'm using this handler click function as an arrow function right here. So in JavaScript, arrow functions are nothing different than normal functions, except one major difference. If I used something like handle click like this, the little thing called this, which we referred to before, will not work in this function. So we need to define arrow functions, because as you may or may not know, arrow functions don't have their own this, and they'll by this means their own instance, and they'll consider the instance that is available on the parent component right above it, and the parent component above handle click is app, so it will refer to app basically. In handle click, we're going to be, let's just console log something right now. Okay, and I'll open the console right here, make it a little smaller so you can see. I will increase the size of the console, and as soon as I click it, it'll say hello. So basically the button is working. And okay, let's define what the click does. Now comes a function that we're going to be using a lot in this little program of ours, and this is the function that basically calls update in a React component. There's one other one, but we're going to be discussing that later. And the function is this dot set state. Now this set state function isn't something native to React, you could say. Even Dart in Flutter uses set state, and it kind of works in the similar way. And you can set the text variable right here as something else. Let's say, no, I like cats more. Okay, so as soon as I click it, it'll simply add and do that. You see, I refresh that to show you again. And if I press add, it changes it. No, I like cats more. No, I like cats more. Okay, so that's how states work. Okay, and this is a really simple representation of states, and you can be using these for anything basically. Okay, then there's now what? Let's just jump into our main program that we're going to be building, and remove this structured state for now. And I have a little bit of a little data set ready already. I'm going to copy and paste it from there. And now this is a little data set that I made before. So these are the little variables that we're going to be using in this JSON object array. And you might see this little thing called UID right here. This is what we installed before, and this is how you use packages. So I'm going to show you how to import a package. Now we can simply import, wait, let me see. We can simply import, now this is native to UID right now. And because we install UID, React knows where it exists, so it simply gives us a recommendation that you can use it. And we can save it and it'll work. Now, we're not really doing anything with this data set as of yet, but we have to be doing that. Now, instead of cluttering my main component right like this, all of these things, we're going to be deleting this. And we're going to go into our directory and create another file called list.js. Okay, and we're going to be importing React here too. and we're going to be importing, let's say, now we don't really need to be importing anything else. Oh, by the way, once I import app.css inside the parent component, or actually anywhere inside the whole React function, you could say, it'll work anywhere. So I don't have to necessarily import CSS in this file too for it to work here. That's kind of a good thing and a bad thing at the same time about React. Inside this, we're going to be creating another class list extend react.component, and we're going to be introducing this new thing called as props eventually, so we get that in a bit. State this dot data is equal to this dot. Let's just define it in a little bit. Let's make it an empty array for now. Then this we call the render function, and we return this is the list components. This is the list component. Okay, we have to export it too. And there's another way of exporting components. It's like you can simply write export. Okay, sure. You can simply write export default here. And it'll work. Now, if you want to use the component here, we're going to be importing it here. Import list from list.js. And by the way, React already basically React automatically understands that we're going to be using the list.js function as we're using the JS file. So we don't have to necessarily write like list.js here. Even list will work. Now we have imported list, and that's what we exported. So what we can go ahead and do is simply call list here, and you can see it's in. Oh wait. Oh shit. Okay, that's not how you render a component, my bad. And you can simply do this is a simple this is how you render external components basically. And this is the list component. I'll show it here. Let me check out the comments for a sec. Nothing. Now we have this data set right here, and this creates a whole lot of data which we're going to be using, and we're not going to be using it here. We're going to send it as props. Now these props are basically like variables, so we're going to be sending data is equal to this dot state dot data. Okay, and now we're sending the props, and we can receive the props simply here without, we already have the props in this data and we can't see it, but I can simply show you with using a lifecycle update. Now let's just discuss a little bit about life cycles. That is, this is a whole lot of different life cycles, and you can see it automatically suggests me a lot of life cycles. That is componented catch, mount, update, will mount, will receive props, will unmount, will update. You don't have to worry about all these things. You have to worry about componented mount, componented update, and component will unmount. These are the most famous life cycles basically which we're going to be using, and it's possible that you may not have to use a lot of these ever, honestly. React has actually even deprecated one of these three of these life cycles. That is unsafe component will mount, unsafe component will receive props, and unsafe component will update. According to React, these promote unsafe coding practices, and these are actually going to be removed in the upcoming versions of React. They have come up with the other stuff, but that's not something we're going to be discussing today. Anyway, so let's just add something called componented mount, and inside componented mount we're going to be simply referring to let's say, okay, console.log this dot props. These are the props that come to this function from this function. At this point, this app.js is the parent function and list.js is the child function. So you need to understand that you can only send props from the parent to the child function. You can never send props from the child to the parent function. You can, however, like change stuff in the app.js function right here from the list.js function, and we're going to be doing that once we decide to delete the components in our little app. So as we console log this thing right here, and we're going to be saving, and you can see as soon as the component mounts, it's going to show us a data, and it is list.js8, and that is list.js8 eighth line basically, and as you can see, we get the data, and it has a random ID that was generated by UUID. So this is all UUID does. You don't need to worry about getting into. You don't need to get into UUID at all because it just gives us a random ID, and it has a title of the task that we're going to be adding to our list. It's get sanitizer 2, get sanitizer 3 basically. Okay, and all of these three things have different IDs. And why do we need IDs is something we're going to get into in a little bit. Okay. Now, here what you can do is, instead of setting it as an array, you can simply set it as this.props dot data. That's what we're sending. And you can remove this. Okay, we can still console.log, and I guess this.state dot data, and you can see we get the same thing. We get an array of objects, and it'll have all the things we need. Okay. Okay, I'm not going to say that name, but what does extends do? Basically, in React, that's the way you call a class. Basically, it means that class app extends react.component. That this class right here, it's going to be using React's component feature and to create this whole instance of this class. Like this react.component right here is going to be creating the instance of the class, and we're going to be using that to update the DOM and the virtual DOM and stuff like that. Okay. And is there any other question? Rabindu Chaudhary asks, can I get a certificate after completing this webinar? No, you cannot get a certificate after completing this webinar, but you will most definitely get an insight into how React works and how you can get going with your journey on React and why it is an amazing tool. What is the difference between props and states? Okay, so the main difference between props and states is state isn't something you pass from one component to another. You pass props from one component to another, and when a state changes, as we discussed before, by adding an event listener to this button called handle click right here, when the state changes, the component will re-render, but if the prop changes, the component will not re-render. Okay. Moving further, we have this data in this component, and we have to use this data to basically, let me make this a little smaller. Excuse me for a second. Yeah. So now let's use this data set that we have to create the list. To do that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to call the data component, the data variable inside the render function. So what happens is, as soon as this data component changes and the render component is called again, the whole list can get updated according to whatever thing we're doing to it. And how we're going to do that is simply by we're going to be calling const data, and what I'm doing right now is called destructuring. This is a way of calling variables basically. This basically means this dot state dot data. It destructures it from this dot state. If you want to know more about destructuring assignment, you can hit me up after this webinar, and I can get into detail, because I don't want to take up too much time regarding destructuring. And what we're going to do is let's say the items is equal to data.map. And if you know JavaScript a little bit, you know about the map function. The map function basically goes over every item in the list and returns a new item for the whole data variable. Basically, it'll return a new item for every single item in the list, and we're going to be assigning it to the items right here, which we're going to be using here to display all the lists. And inside this data.map, we're going to be having we're going to be passing another variable. A list. Okay, let's just say list. And inside this, we're going to be returning okay, let's just copy what we did earlier. Actually, this little div right here, we're going to copy this, and instead of this .state.text, we'll have list.text, because it's the same data set but just with a different variable name. And we're going to give it a key. Actually, I'm not going to give it a key right now, because I want to show you what happens if you don't give it a key. And we'll simply give it list.text. Okay, and this will have I love dogs or whatever text it has. It'll have get sanitizer basically, and we'll call it here the items. And I'll save it. And you see it doesn't work, because as you can see, I'm not passing a key variable. So what it's saying here right now is each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Check the render method of list and see all that stuff. So every single child in this should have a key prop basically, okay? And you need it's important that it has one. So let's just give it a key, which is going to be okay. Before that, we need to check our data set, because I don't think it has a variable called text. It has a variable called title. That's also a reason it doesn't show. Okay, wait. And I can save it, and we'll get all the show all the title. Will give us a warning. Now this warning may not mean much to you right now because everything is working, but eventually when you're working with bigger data sets that have a lot of functionality, now because like this little div right here can have its own set of functionality. It can have its own set of things it's going to do. So what we're going to do is give it a key, so this warning doesn't exist anymore. And key is going to be equal to list.id, because we have that defined already, and that warning is gone. Okay, let's just do one thing, and we're going to be reducing the font size of this, because it's really too big and it's hard for me to. But I want. Okay, we don't really have to do it like this. Actually, I can just zoom out. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to add. Now let's make this add button functional. Okay, we want to be able to add different components to the end of this little array right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to first delete this, because we don't need this anymore. We're rendering our own data. And before we move forward, I'm going to check out the comments. And there's nothing yet. Okay, so then there's now we're sending data. Now let's add a add function. So what we're going to do is we're going to be adding an input field. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to be discussing a thing that React has, which is called event management, you could say, something like that. So what happens is we're going to be adding an input field right here, and we're going to set its value, and this is exactly what you think it means. You can see the value of the input. Basically, the value of this input inside this input is going to be what we want it to be, and we can meddle with it as we want. So I'm going to add another state here called value. It's going to be empty at start. We don't want it to be anything at the start, right? So I'm going to set its value as this dot state of value, and we're going to add an on change. This is another event listener, which is available in almost every single React component, every single React child component that we use. And what on change does is something that you may not be able to guess at first, but let's say there's a whole div of lists. Okay, let's say we give on change to this right here, on change, something like that. Okay, and what on change does is it will check if this div changes, and it will also check if anything inside this div, inside this whole div changes, and this will be called if anything inside this whole div will change. Okay, so on change is limited to which div you call it to, which instance you call it to. Okay, and we're going to be handle input. Okay, and by default what handle input what on change does is it will send us an event parameter, and we're going to be using that. So I'll show you what that looks like first. Okay, I'm going to save this, and see we get an event little field here, and we're console logging whatever on change sends us. If I write anything here, it's going to send us a really weird looking thing, which is a whole big object, and it has a lot of things you can do with this. These are basically all functions that you can get when this is used. What we want to worry about though is this target little target thing here, and what we're going to do is we're going to be first of all we're going to be doing this dot, okay, console.log e. Now you can see if we console.log this dot target and we enter anything, it will show us an input with value of which it doesn't have a value. That's because, wait, okay, where's the value variable? Yeah, it doesn't have a value, and we have to assign it a value because you see we assigned it a value as this dot state dot value, and we're not updating this value right here. We're not updating this, so we have to be updating this. So what we're going to do is this dot set state value, this dot e dot target dot value. Now, and it's going to update the value, and it's going to give us the value of the target, and we can simply write e dot target dot value right here, and whatever we write, we're going to be getting it right here. So that's pretty cool, and we can use this as just like we want. So what we're going to do in this handle click function is we're going to get this dot state dot value, and now this the text that we enter here is what you want it to be added to this array, right? So what we're going to do is let a new array is equal to this dot state dot data. Yeah, this dot state dot data. Okay, and we're going to be doing new array dot push. Now, if you know about arrays in JavaScript, you know that push and pop are the two functions, and there's a whole lot of other functions called unshift and shift and filter and map, and so you can do a lot of things with arrays in JavaScript. And if you go to the W3 Schools website, or if you Google how to work with arrays in JavaScript, you'll get a list of a whole lot of functions that you can use. One of these functions is push, and it is exactly what it seems like. If you have studied DSA, you would know that push basically means adding to the end of the array or something, adding to the top of the stack or something like that. And we're going to be using this push function right here to add to the, and it's pretty self-explanatory actually. We're going to be adding an object which will have the ID of UUID, which will always create a new ID for us, and it will have a text, no title actually, e.target.value. No, wait one. This.state.value. Okay, and I think this should work if I haven't made any mistakes. And if I add anything, this is good. And if I add, it'll, okay, we forgot to set state the new value basically. So in handler click we pushed it to the variable, but like we have to set state also. So this dot set state data new array, and this should work I think. And if we add it, it gets added, and we can add it a million times if you want. It doesn't matter. I'm going to refresh that, and we're going to have a little validation here, and we're just simply going to add if this dot state of value. And what this JavaScript if condition will simply do is it'll check if there's anything in the value. It could be nothing, right? So we don't want to add empty variables basically. And in JavaScript by default, if you enter something that doesn't exist, it won't take it. Okay, I'll show you that. I'll add an else condition, false basically. And suppose it's empty right now, so if I press add, it's going to show false. And it's going to show multiple times. It won't add to a data set right now. So what we're going to do is remove this for now. I'll check out the comments once. Okay. And now we're setting the new data set, and okay, that's cool. So now we have the new data set. I can show you one thing why I said JavaScript is not the perfect language, and let's just comment this out for now. And I'll show you one thing. You know, in JavaScript you can set variables as null. So let's just jf for something. Let jf is equal to a null. And if you console.log type of basically defines what type of thing we are, type of jf, it'll actually show you object. But we know that null is not an object, and it's actually a bug in JavaScript, which hasn't been fixed for the past I think 2 years, since it's existed actually. It's one of the reasons people hate JavaScript for some reason. So just wanted to show you that. And okay, so this will work. We can add whatever we want now. Okay, so I want to be able to delete all these things, right? So let's just add a delete button to let's add a delete function actually first. So let's just say delete component. So what we're going to do is we're going to accept an ID of which component we want to delete, and what we're going to do is we will simply do this. Wait, I'll just copy and paste this because I want to take too much time doing this. Okay, so now what this does is basically it will take the new task from here, from this data, then it will filter the new task for the specific ID that we got here, and if this ID exists, it will return it. If it doesn't exist, as you can see, I've used the not equal to function right here. This is not equal to 1. It will not return it. So in the new array, this this specific ID JSON object will not exist, and we will set state the data again, and it will send the data again to this function. But we want to be able to call this from a specific list item, right? So we can't just call it from this function. So we have to send this function as prop. And this is what I was saying before. You can send delete. You can send functions as props. So what we're going to do is delete component. No wait, I can simply say delete is equal to this dot delete component, and we can send this function, and it will be there now. But we're not using it yet. So let's just define a button, small little button right here, and we can simply call on click. We'll do this dot props dot delete. And you might think we can just simply pass props here, right? We can simply just like give it a list.id and this will work, right? But this doesn't really work because JavaScript will consider this as an IFE, and by IFE I mean IIFE. What an IFE is an immediately. Okay, I'm not going to write it. Okay, so what an IFE is, it's an immediately invoked function expression. So what JavaScript does is when it sees a function like this, it'll invoke immediately. And by that I mean, as soon as this component mounts, it's going to invoke this function immediately and won't even think about any other things. That's what an immediately invoked function is. And you can create immediately invoked functions otherwise too, not just like this. But we don't want to do that because that's kind of useless at this point. Sometimes you might even need immediately invoked functions, I think, but I've never had to use them. So anyway, so how do you do that now? How do we pass variables? How do we pass parameters? So what we're going to do, we're going to be using is we're going to be using an arrow function which has empty basically. It is empty. We're going to be calling this dot props or delete, and we're going to be sending list.id. Delete list.id, as simple as that. And we're going to be naming it and delete me, and I think this should work. And all of these have a button because and they are kind of styled too because we added a CSS for the buttons. And if I click it, no, it doesn't go away. Why is that happening? Right? You might think why doesn't it go away? And if you okay, let's use another lifecycle, that is a component update. Basically, every time a component updates, it'll send a it'll do something you want, what is inside it. And you have to be careful with component update because if you set a state in component update without any if conditions or anything, React will let you just go into a infinite loop of re-renders, and it will call component did update recursively, and it will keep going until basically React shows an error. So I can show you how that works. Let's just say a bool basically, and we'll set it to false. Okay, and this dot set state bool, the opposite of bool, so it'll keep changing basically. And if we update this component, it'll go in an extra like it'll go into a infinite loop, and it'll say maximum update depth exceeded. This can happen when the component repeatedly calls set state inside component will update. It tells you exactly what's wrong, and so we don't want to do this at all. So we're gonna have to be careful while using component update. And okay, so what we're going to be doing in this component update call is component update by default has two things: pref props and pref state. So what pref prop means, before the component updated, this component had some props, and before it updated, it had some state. And what it does basically is now in this component update function, we have pref props and pref states, and because it has already updated, now that's what I mean by component did update, we also have the new props and the new states, so we can compare them and update the function, update the whole component accordingly. So what we'll simply do is if pref props dot data is not equal to this dot props dot data, Basically, if nothing is changed, sorry, if something has changed, we're going to be setting the state again. This dot set state. This dot set state data. This dot props dot data. Now you may ask, why do we have to do this? Okay, let's just run it first. Let's see if it's working. Yeah, it's working now. So we can delete whatever we want, and we can add new functions. Toby. And we can delete it. It works perfectly now. Okay. So why do we want to do this? Okay, well, why do we have to update it when, as I said before, we're already calling it here. So when the component updates, it should automatically do that. But that doesn't happen because I showed you first. This thing right here, the state variable, is actually a constructor, and it'll become a constructor when Babel transpiles this code. And now a constructor, as you may know, only runs once when the class is first invoked, right? And when the object is first used, you could say, object is first called, and that happened when this whole component was rendered at the start. So it sets the whole data at the start, but that doesn't work after the component updates because the constructor isn't called repeatedly. So we have to define a component update function here, which will work with it. And we don't really need the prep state, so we can actually remove that. Doesn't matter, I think, and it'll still work properly. So that's about it, I think. And let's see if there's anything. No, there's nothing. And that's about it actually about the main things in React. And let me see if there's something else left to discuss. Okay, so as you can see, we can add tasks there just as we want, and we can remove them just as we want. So it doesn't matter at this point. So I don't think there's anything left to do now at this point. So I guess we can conclude. So if there's any questions you guys have, you can ask me right now. Also going to be concluding this webinar in like 15 or 20 minutes after we discuss the final thing. And also before we finish, let's just go over life cycles one last time. And if I show you okay, so in this, there's a little diagram I have for life cycles. As you can see, when mounting, the constructor is called first, as I showed you before. Okay, I can't touch the screen. Wow. This is called first, okay, when the constructor is called first. And then there's a little render phase where you can get derived statement from should component update. These are things you need not worry about at this point. And then it is updated. And there's three things, as I said. There's two things that can actually update the props, update the state, and set state and force update. Force update is something you can use even like suppose you're not really updating the state and you still want to update the component. If you are in such a situation, you can use force update. And then there's after render, the main three things you need to worry about are component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount. These are the three safe things that you can still be using in React. And if you want to learn more about these things, you can simply go to reactjs.org. And there's a lot of things that you can be reading from here. These docs are amazing, and it's really easy to understand all of these things. These are the things we basically covered, I think, and all of these things. And the new things, which are advanced guides, basically this context and error boundaries, forwarding refs, all of these higher order components, which is one of the most important things, I think. you can be using these things. You can be learning these things just from the docs directly, and because the docs are well maintained and really in depth, I could say. And now that you have all this knowledge with you, it's going to be really easy for you to understand the docs, because all of these things, basically what I just mentioned right now. Okay. Okay. So thank you for attending the webinar, and I'm going to wait for like around 1 minute for any questions if there are, and after that we'll be concluding. Thank you for attending the webinar, guys. I'll see you later, I guess. You can contact me anytime. My details are, I think, in the description. Wait. Okay, it's not in the description, but you can find it in the on the Instagram post, and I'll see you later. I'm going to be ending the stream right now, and thank you for attending. Thanks, Akshat. Thanks, Akshat. Okay, guys, I think that's all for now. Thanks, Akshat and Radhe. And I guess we'll see each other later. Goodbye.